everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today for episode 9 of season 5 of the Revise and Resubmit podcast. I'm Dr. Kim Bissell, the Southern Progress Endowed Professor in Magazine Journalism and the Associate Dean for Research in the College of Communication and Information Sciences at the University of Alabama.
And I'm Dr. Annalisa Boland, an assistant professor in the Department of Communication Studies, also at the University of Alabama, and we both work in the Institute for Communication and Information Research, or the ICIR, at UA. All right, new week, new questions, Kim.
All right.
This one I'm going to ask might be a little different from others. Okay, here we go. When you think about documentary films or documentary programs, what comes to mind? Do you watch them? Did you watch them? Or do you prefer like rom-coms, action adventure, straight up adrenaline style movies, horror films?
I love this question, and I'll try to keep my answer short. When I worked professionally, one of the things that I did was documentary style photojournalism. I looked for stories, some that would take months or even a year to put together, but I told my stories via still frames. So with that experience, I was always drawn to documentaries. And I have to admit, I've watched my fair share of documentaries about running, adventure sports, and people doing really outstanding but scary physical things that probably seem impossible to just about everyone else. Jimmy Chin is a documentary filmmaker, and he's an avid adventurist. So he's made the film that some of you may have seen called Free Solo about the unassisted ascent on El Capitan in Yosemite. He made a film called 14 Peaks about climbers trying to summit the 14 highest peaks within a calendar year, mind you, and a documentary film called Meru, which was another adventure story about climbing a specific route on Meru in the Indian Himalayas. But I think my absolute favorite documentary, see, I didn't keep it short at all. Similar theme is called Skid Row Marathon. It's won a ton of prizes at different film festivals, and I found it to be one of the most inspiring documentaries I have ever seen. Okay, enough of me and my adventure stuff. What about you?
Okay, so I love an adventure. I love wildlife. I love sports. I love horror. I love crime. No, I don't love any of those things in real life. But I will watch anything. So I live my pseudo adventure side because I really have none. I'm 1,000,000,000% risk averse in my life, but thank goodness for filmmakers, including documentary filmmakers who make other people's real adventures, and I'm including snakes and dogs and kittens in those things, more accessible for me to actually take part in watching them.
That's true. You're living vicariously.
Absolutely.
Those more risk averse.
Yep.
So we have been chattering a lot, but that's because all of this chattering speaks directly to our next guest, who is a documentary filmmaker and who has produced several award-winning films that have been seen at national film festivals and international film festivals. He's quite new to the Department of Journalism and Creative Media, but he is not new at all to filmmaking. Please join us in welcoming John Haley, an assistant professor in journalism and creative media, to the podcast. Welcome, John. Thank you so much for joining us today, John. We are thrilled to be able to talk to you today.
Absolutely. It's great to be here.
All right, John. So we're going to kick it off with a couple quick questions. First, where are you from?
I am originally from Minnesota, southern Minnesota, a town called Mankato. And lived most of my life there, actually.
Okay, so that's the perfect state to be from that has the accent in the state name. And just more than I could have hoped for. Okay, so
you hear the O's very clearly. Yeah.
What's your position now? What are you doing?
Yeah, I'm an assistant professor in journalism and creative media. Right now I'm teaching classes in advanced videography and film and media theory. Work a bit more on that creative media side in film, specifically documentary production is kind of my practice as a creator.
Excellent.
So, John, we know that you've gotten a degree from Notre Dame, and we're not going to cast any judgment here, but we do have to ask how this transition has gone, seeing that Notre Dame and Alabama were a rival at one point a couple of years ago. Does Roll Tide come easily to you, or are you still trying to figure out all the madness?
I'm happy to report that it comes fairly easily. It's been, there were some tough times in the past years that I won't go into. But now everyone's been so welcoming coming to campus, so it's hard to not want to say Roll Tide when you get here. So, but yeah, there were a couple little moments of tension, I'll just say, in that relationship, right?
Excellent. Okay, so John, as you look back on your life, think to like young John growing up. Did you think that you were going to be a filmmaker, a documentary filmmaker, or is that something that you discovered a passion for later?
Yeah. So yes and no, I think. It was always for a long time. It was kind of this dream, but something that I wasn't sure if it was practical or how it would work. But I just loved. I grew up watching movies with family, which I think a lot of people do, and not just watching though, kind of talking about them and discussing them and looking at how different people react to different movies too, and just kind of the variety of responses that people can have to these works. And I started off studying business, and it wasn't working, and it was clear that my heart wasn't in it. And so it took a semester for me to switch to studying film. And I think what was really unpredictable was going this route of documentary specifically. I always thought of writing, and as a kid I would just write stories and kind of let my imagination go wild. But when I took a documentary course in undergrad, I think I had this perception, and this is something I see that a lot of folks have of documentary as it being this space where it's kind of just cut and dry, telling the facts, just reporting facts, and that's it, and not having a space for creativity and artistic voice within that. And it's certainly just not true. And I think there's something exciting actually that happens when you're looking at stories rooted in reality, but there are a million ways you could tell that story, and what artistic approaches, what storytelling decisions are you bringing in and using to tell that story that is rooted in reality, is a really exciting question for creators, I think. And that was something that this idea of kind of like creating space around elements in someone's actual story, and it's in some ways it's a big challenge too, to not do any disservice to someone's story too. But when I took that course and just thought of all the different ways that you can put these media skills into practice to tell real stories about the world, rooted in truth and perspective, that was a really exciting and unpredictable development, I think, in my life.
Okay, so here's my quick follow-up there is, what led you to being a professor? Is that something that you thought when you kind of transitioned over into film study? You think like, ooh, and I want to teach it?
Yeah, so no, I'll say right off the bat, I didn't think that when I was in undergrad. And I think too, it's worth noting that when I graduated undergrad, I kind of felt like I didn't have a job set up until I actually didn't really, get a job. I ended up doing Americorps for a year, which is a job, but it's, a year of service. And that was partially because I had some friends who were just moving out to LA, and they were like, we're just going to figure it out. And I didn't think I was ready to do that. But I took a position, and I ended up being placed in Portland, Oregon. And I was working at a agency that serves young people who are experiencing housing instability or homelessness, and there was a GED center as part of that. And that's where I worked most of the days. I would work mornings in the drop-in center where folks could come in and get food, and then afternoons in the GED center helping young people, continue their education. And it was really, I really liked that experience, because I think, and this is something I try to bring into teaching is, and it's difficult sometimes in bigger classes too, but trying to, I'd like sit down with the student and try to figure out what were the challenges they were facing, and how could I develop a, approach that and a plan to kind of move past those challenges. And I just really enjoyed that experience and working together. And I was teaching, math and English, and which are not necessarily, they're not what I teach now, but but it was kind of a wonderful experience. And then in graduate school, I taught undergrad courses in film too. And I think that was kind of the perfect marriage there, where it's like, not just do I, like being in this exciting space of discovery. I mean, it's even like, solving a math problem. There's some excitement in seeing someone do that who hasn't been able to do that before, or who had some challenges with regard to, I don't know, navigating all the rules of math and everything. And it's exciting too, seeing what students create and how they we teach editing, we teach how to use a camera. Yes, we teach all that stuff. And we do teach visual language and all these considerations students should bring into that process of creating. But it's really, really exciting seeing then, like, what do they go out and make? And so I think, I never saw it really coming, but there were kind of like little, I guess, stepping stones that maybe hinted that this was something I might enjoy.
Nice.
Oh, wow. So I have so many follow-up questions, and we might have to have a part 2 on this.
Absolutely.
Going back to what you said when you were kind of telling us about how you got into it, you said that when you were growing up, you used to watch movies with your family. So I'm wondering, were you watching documentaries with your family? Were you watching just comedies or like an array of films? Because I'm thinking about how you shift from how you and others shift from, oh, I'm just sitting back and it's 2 hours of straight up entertainment, versus documentary films where in many cases they could be entertaining, but they also push you to think, and it's kind of a different experience. So what was yours growing up?
Yeah, I would say, honest answer is very few, if any, documentaries. But that's been something I'll note now too, as and even in undergrad when I started kind of moving toward that documentary space, that's something to bring into, whenever if I'm back home visiting family, which doesn't happen as often as it should, I guess, but bringing documentaries and into that space and saying, like, let's watch this, and see how it functions similarly in some ways to our fictional. Certain documentaries, I think, do function similarly to narrative fiction films. Others function very differently, but there's still a core kind of storytelling aspect there. And so we were watching, I mean, my parents would kind of bring out their, favorite films from when they were growing up, and we'd watch new films that come out too, and so a variety. But I think, at the core is kind of, and this is where I think I started to think about my journey as a creator, or starting to work as a creator, is just how varied the responses were. And once, in talking about them too, it's not just I like this, I don't like this. It's certain moments that people latch onto, right? And how those speak to certain people, or don't speak to other people. And I think that's just something, as a creator, as a maker, you build all this intention into your work, and you build all this, you really try to sculpt moments and create moments of meaning, and build a structure. But to some degree, and I think one of the scary but maybe exciting parts of film is that you never know if it's going to be received exactly that way.
True.
There's a lot of room for people to take it in different directions, or for people to see things that you might not have seen. And I think that goes, I draw parallels to that too with, I show films to peers and mentors when I'm in the editing process. And there's just such, I think, strength to that process, because it illuminates all these areas of things that you might be missing, especially as I'm someone who typically shoots and edits my own work. And so when I'm there filming, I have all the information. And when I'm editing and putting the story together, I can fill in the blanks. I can fill in any blank spots in that story with what I know from having been there, from having had all these conversations with the folks involved in a story. Viewers can't do that. And so I think those, talking amongst family members about how we receive films and what people miss and what people latch onto, I think it informs certainly my work as a creator too, and just how you want to, you do want to control as much as you can of the story, but there comes a moment where you send it out into the world and you can't necessarily be certain as to how people will take it and receive it.
Okay, so here's maybe a question about that process.
Yeah.
When you're filming, and or kind of in the, I'm gonna get terminology wrong, but
that's okay.
Stage, like, are you thinking? Do you think equally or more or less about the content, the story, or about like the technical part of capturing and filming, and then how it might lead to what you need to edit and that sort? Is it separate? Is it all one thing that you have to holistically figure out?
Yeah. So I think it's all one thing. But I think this gets to a really, in narrative fiction filmmaking, you're hopefully working with a shot list, and you've you can work that way in documentary too, but unpredictable things happen, right? And I tend to film pretty observationally, so just filming things as they unfold, and try to get some information as to what that space will be like, what will take place. But there's I try to film with editing in mind for sure, and then also I'm trying to get better about not overshooting and getting too much footage, because there should always be kind of some consideration, I guess, for how does this fit into the larger story. So I think both of those, for example, one on a project that I've been working on, there's a scene where someone is stocking shelves at the food pantry, and so there's that's a repetitive action, right? She grabs these pallets of grape jam. Do people here say jam or jelly?
They're different.
Yeah.
Oh, they're different.
Yeah,
Okay.
they're different things.
Well, I need to tell everyone in Minnesota that they are in fact different, because I think people use them interchangeably there. But anyway, grape jam, and so she's stocking shelves, and that's a very repetitive action, right? So there's an opportunity to start with a wide shot, and maybe there are 20 jars of jam that she's stocking. Get 4 or 5 in a wide shot, then get a close up, and there's usually an opportunity within that to cut on action and shorten that scene, but make it a really pleasing cut in a way that might unfold in narrative fiction. There's also, I think, attention to what's in the frame too. And this same project, it deals with political questions of where we are as a country, of influence of across levels of government. And there was kind of as I was filming, it's not just, okay, I need to get a shot of this person moving through space. It's, oh, there's this, this person is kind of silhouetted against the city, and here's the American flag in the shot too. And so this now becomes a question, having the American flag on this tall structure, and then this individual person makes, visually signals that this is a story about, one person's place, questions of identity, questions of our future as a country, where we're going as a country, all embedded in one person's story, right? And so things within the frame and how you arrange the frame can tie back to the story that you're trying to tell, and can underscore a lot of those themes that are embedded in that story.
Okay, one more question then here.
Yeah.
You this, I don't mean this in a bad way, but you obviously
Sure.
sound like you know what you're doing, right? How long did it take you to figure out, like, you know what you're doing?
Well, I mean, so it's an interesting question to ask with documentary, because there are still moments where I go through footage all the time and think, I wish I had gotten this instead of this, or I wish I had moved the camera there instead of there. And a lot of that is just knowing, the first time I filmed for this project, I didn't necessarily know who would be larger in the story and who would not be. And I didn't know, I think the story's gotten not simplified, but maybe a bit more clear cut in terms of its narrative, and a little less sprawling. So I think there's, with documentary, I don't think you ever quite know, but you can make really informed decisions, I think, based on previous experience. And I think there are little tips, I think, that you just learn, and people can tell you, and then you don't. People tell you these tips and give you these suggestions, and then you don't. Maybe your first time you don't actually use them, and then you go back through the footage and you think, "Wow, okay, actually, this I can see where they're coming from." So, like, I tell students all the time, like, if you're filming a B-roll shot, so you set up a tripod and you're getting a shot of the town, count to 15 seconds at least before you cut, because I think oftentimes we think of it's like we're taking a picture, and so we just set it up, okay, it looks great, cool, record, and then go, and then you end up with these 3-second B-roll shots that it'd be nice if that was 10 seconds or 15 seconds. And just the idea of holding a shot for longer, or having people enter and exit the frame, little kind of guideposts that you can use even in situations where the story and the way people move and who's essential to the story is still kind of an open question that's being negotiated. Those little things can, I think, guide you and within that process of negotiation. So it took time. I mean, in some ways, I think I go back to the first project I ever filmed, and this was when I was still learning the camera, and I actually found that I was less daring maybe to change the focal length and get all this wild shot variety or whatever. So I was kind of just holding the camera and filming, and this was a story about a man who spent 12 years on death row and 40 years in prison, and we were just kind of filming as things unfolded. And that, I go back and watch that, and there's all these things I can point to where that wasn't, I wish I had done this better, or this, we didn't really light that interview the way we should have, and all these things. But there are these really lovely long takes, and sometimes that stuff, I think too, it's worth going back and thinking, well, what did I do right, or what was kind of maybe embedded in my process from the beginning that I can even go back to. And I think just creating space for us to sit with someone's story and experience it in a long uninterrupted take, that's something that I kind of I don't know, will always hold on to and kind of go back to. So I think it's always this kind of process of figuring out, and it's specific to the story, how things will be filmed, who will be filmed, what type of visual arrangement within the frame you're going for. But there are things too that kind can guide you through from film to film through that process. So it takes time, and it's an ongoing process too. And I think we'll always take time to figure out for each project.
So how do you find your stories or your subjects? Do you feel like everyone has a story or everyone has a documentary in himself or herself? Or does it take a lot of work on the front end for you to figure out what you're going to produce? And does the story, like, do you go in kind of knowing the story you want to tell? Or is it something where you might be in the process of filming and you're like, wait a minute, it's going in this direction? That was 2 questions. I'm sorry.
No, but they're absolutely connected though. And I think, yeah, I mean, it usually starts, the answer is, I think it usually starts out, there's some theme or some larger aspect of our society, or where we're at politically, or socially as a country, that I'm really interested in. And I think I try to, some issues are just not necessarily always going to be issues, but they're certainly present and have, like the death penalty. That's an ongoing issue in this country, an ongoing question. It's unresolved. There are states that have banned it, and states that still use it. And so that's a story like Tony's, where he was on death row for 12 years. That was one where, and I was working with a colleague, or a friend and collaborator, Julie Saramba, on that one. And she kind of had heard his story through a friend or through a family member, and kind of got connected to it that way. But it happens differently each time. And that was something where I think we both were very interested in this question of trying to re-enter society after 12 years on death row and 40 years in prison, and what that looks like. But as far as, I think I often, in 2020, I did a film, or I filmed it throughout 2020 and then post-production in 2021, but it was about an electoral campaign in Wisconsin. And that was, I was living in Chicago at the time, but I found that it felt like this hub for electoral politics in 2020. And I found a story of a young woman running for office for state assembly in Wisconsin, and just found that her campaign distilled a lot of these themes that were present in 2020. It was in Wisconsin, this notorious swing state. It was in a suburban area, in a gerrymandered district. She was a nurse running in times of COVID, all of these questions. But to answer your question of things change too, they do. And that film was one example of that, where it, started out, I was determined that this was going to be a microcosm of American politics in this one election. And as the story developed, there was kind of a love story that was actually developing alongside it. And there was a little bit of maybe initial panic of, shoot, well, how is this changing from the story that I set out to tell? But I think what's important to remember with documentaries is that these are real people and these are real lives. And so trying to, shoehorn some story or force the story to be something that maybe it's not exclusively anymore, can be an act of disrespect too, I think, to real people and their lives, and can be an ethical question too. And so I think that was one where it's kind of subtle, and it kind of changes throughout. The story changes from being so politically focused to being now very personally focused on this relationship. But it felt like a natural kind of shift to make, and it felt like a respectful shift to make too. And I don't think it weakens the story at all. I think it actually points to, now the story is a bit about this dilemma of the personal and the political, right? Being a candidate and having this public persona, but also these, moments of kind of comfort and security that you can share with someone you love. And that space that's created separate from this whirlwind space of an electoral campaign. So each one happens differently. I try to And I'll just say too, I reach out to people in a ways if I hear their story in the news or hear of something like through someone else, but I always try to have a very clear conversation up front about what this would involve, because I think people need to know what they're agreeing to if they're agreeing to appear in a documentary. I'm really happy when they do, but I want that to be an honest conversation about, I'm going to be filming you, I'm going to be asking these questions, I'm going to be, and I always show work in progress and when it's completed to people who participate in it. But I think it's just important to center those conversations up front too.
So I'm trying to think of how to ask this. Is there like a consortium of documentary filmmakers? Like you mentioned a collaborator.
Yeah.
But this is also like it's not like you're telling a story about how I went and picked a flower one day and it smelled lovely and life. You're describing some like really like heavy, to be honest, like heavy stuff. And does that affect you? People that understand the work and the process that you do as a filmmaker, that you kind of have some moments of reflection, but also like, yeah, this work that we do is hard.
Yeah, I mean, I think there are kind of formal and informal kind of collectives or collaboratives. There's also been some really great resources that have come up in recent years from groups like CMSI and a couple other groups. International Documentary Association is one, where they've kind of tried to organize and put together some resources about, because I think you're right exactly that it can be tough to bear and maybe sit with someone else's trauma or someone else's pain. It can also be an ethical question too of like, what does it mean to ask someone to relive that and to retell that in a interview setting? And so we've seen groups like, there was just released, it's a framework for like non-extractive filmmaking, an ethical framework. And so it's a document that kind of compiles how we can think of documentary, because there is a problematic history of documentary being extractive, right? And being unethical, way back to the origins of filmmaking. And so I think it's those resources too, kind of providing space and real suggestions for how are you thinking about what is my position, what is my power as a filmmaker, how have I had honest conversations with the participants in my film, am I the right person to tell this story, is getting a lot of traction as a question that I think is an essential question too. And even the act of asking that question, I think just prompts you to think about how you're telling the story and how you're communicating with people who are in the story more intentionally. So yeah, I think there are resources out there. It is tough because sometimes, I think there are groups that work as a team, and there's also, and this is getting more kind of just to like the logistical workflow. It can be, because sometimes, and when I work, it's often just me kind of there filming. But there's also, I think, like the project I'm working on now, I'm working with the same collaborator, and there's kind of a benefit, and I nodded to this earlier, but I was there filming. I was there in all the situations. I kind of have this idea in my mind of, this is what this section is going to tell. This is what this scene is going to tell. And I'm filling in those gaps. And my collaborator who wasn't there can say, this is unclear to me. And that's beneficial for me to know, because here's, I'm filling in this story with all the knowledge I have from being there, but someone who wasn't there isn't experiencing it in the same way. And that's, a valuable thing to know as editors for what context do we need to add? What form is that going to take? Do we need to add a text block? Do we need to shift things around in the story? Do we need to this section of interview that we're thinking of cutting, when we cut it, what do we lose, right? And if we don't lose anything, that's a good note that we should probably cut it. But if we feel like suddenly there's something missing and there's some gap, that's really valuable to know and to figure out either keep it in or how can we deliver that information to the audience too.
Oh my goodness, John, I haven't even started to get at all of the questions I have, but we will legit have to do a part 2 with you because
I'm more than happy to do it. It's yeah, absolutely.
So we are actually at the wrap-up section of this episode, but we want to make sure that we end this with some recommendations for you, and I'm really excited to hear these answers. So, number 1, what is your favorite TV show, or what should we be watching right now?
Yeah, well, and this might be I don't know if it's a different. Well, I'll just say I've been watching Abbott Elementary. And I love it. And I know it's not, a documentary TV show or anything, or a documentary miniseries, but I think it's great. And I think it's just, I don't know, we need, there's a lot of moments of joy and then also moments of kind of serious questions of American public education system too. And I think attention drawn to that and underfunding. And so I love it. I think it's a great show.
Great suggestion. I haven't seen it yet.
Following that up, what's the movie that we need to see right now?
Okay. Well, I really, do they have to be current movies?
No,
in theaters?
not at
Okay.
all. No.
So for documentaries, I think Minding the Gap is a film I love by Bing Liu, and it's set in Rockford, Illinois, and it's 3 young men kind of coming of age, and the filmmaker is one of the characters too, and so it's interesting to read about the film because there was a cut that didn't have him in it, and then he got notes from the producer saying, I think you need to be more of a character in it, but it touches on certainly heavy themes of domestic violence and the cycles of violence that can create growing up in a home environment like that, looking at it through these 3 characters' experiences. But I think it's a film that touches on these really heavy issues and does so in a really personal way, and it's, I think, a interesting and thought-provoking film to watch today, thinking about the filmmaker being as participant, as one of the characters in the film himself. I also think Time by Garrett Bradley is an incredible film. This is another one too, when thinking about creating and how works get created, and how documentary can be so unpredictable. It's a film about the criminal justice system, about incarceration, but it's a story of a woman's. It's directed by Garrett Bradley, and it's a story of a woman trying to her work to kind of free her husband or get her husband out of jail. But when Garrett Bradley was filming, there came a point in the process where her participant handed her hours and hours, I think over 100 hours of footage, archival footage of home videos that she had shot of their kids, kind of preserving memories for her husband who was incarcerated. And so that completely upended or not upended, but it shifted the filmmaking process, and this archival footage gets woven in, this home video footage gets woven in beautifully to the film. But again, a really intriguing example to look at the situation behind the production and what happened, and how these moments and these decisions of what's included and what's not included, and how does that change the aesthetic of the film and the experience of the film, are really, really, I don't know, I think really complex and exciting questions to ask and to look at in a film that's very, very beautifully done, but touches on serious issues of incarceration in America.
so many recommendations here.
Yeah.
Okay, so here's a really fun one that we're gonna end on. If your life were a reality show, what would it be? And you can make up a reality show.
Oh gosh. Wow. Well, you know, we did have in my hometown, we did have someone from my high school who was on American Idol briefly. But that would not have been me for sure. So yeah, I mean, I don't know. I think maybe I would be in another life if I really, you know, devoted time to it. I would be a chef and devote so much time to cooking. So maybe I would appear in, you know, like diners, drive-ins, and dives or something like that, if that counts.
Yes.
And I just pop in as suddenly I'm running this restaurant somewhere, and cooking all this stuff that right now I really don't know how to cook. So, I mean, I do, but not in the way a chef can. So.
And that can be its own documentary right there.
Right. The process by which that happens. Yeah, exactly.
John, it has been so much fun talking to you today, and legit, we're gonna get you back on for part 2. But thank you for making the time to catch up with us and tell our listeners more about who you are and what you do.
Absolutely. It's been wonderful, and I appreciate both of you, you know, taking the time to ask me these questions, and it's always fun to talk about this stuff. So I'm absolutely down to come for part 2.
No, we'll get you for part 2.
All right. Thank you.
All right. I'll be there.
Thanks, John.
Thank you. Bye.